and she began teaching at St. Mary's College in 1992. It was particularly difficult for me to cull through the nomination for highlights, given that it was 29 pages long. Please don't accept that as a standard for a nomination. But it was rich with the comments of many people, more than a dozen students, staff, faculty commenting on Becky's achievements. Her achievements, of course, include her scholarship. She's the author of several books: Cross-Functional Teams, Organizational Change in the Human Services, Transferring Learning into New Organizational Processes, and Social Justice, Respect, and Meaning-Making. Her research with organizations that serve marginalized groups has resulted in several publications, including research with an interfaith coalition in San Jose dedicated to eliminating the practice of elder abuse, and articles on Catholic elementary schools and social justice initiatives. She has also been a participant in the Lasallian Social Justice Institute. Becky's leadership extends to her service to the college. She was a faculty member, program director, and interim dean of the School of Extended Education, guided the development of the BA in Leadership and Organizational Studies, and served as interim director, interim is in quotes because that was from 2007 to 2011, perhaps the longest interim stint I've heard of, for the EDD program. And she developed and led mentoring programs for students and faculty, and led the search for the current dean of the Formative School of Education. Above all, Becky is a teacher, and her fusion of leadership, inquiry, and service make her an exemplary Lasallian educator. Her students know this. Several wrote on her behalf regarding her nomination. One writes, "Professor Proehl made me better because she made me work harder and gave me the support I needed to reach that level." And one tells this story, which I thought was worth sharing. "When I received the email confirming my grade on the assignment, I was at my niece's soccer game. Surely the rest of the fans in the stands were wondering why this tall guy suddenly stood up and put his hands in the air, victorious, especially when nothing particularly interesting was happening on the field at the time. But I knew, of course, that I had just scored one of the most important goals of my life. Whether it was through action research with a community organization, a support group for at-risk graduate students, or a friendly, 'Hey, y'all,' in the St. Mary's Library, Dr. Proehl understands that at the heart of every successful student is a teacher who inspires the very best. And as the student concludes, our cohort, our classes, and our community are blessed." Becky's colleagues noted her quiet diplomacy and honesty and wrote, "I aspire to Rebecca's kindness and integrity, her ability to herd cats with stealthy, sensitive leadership, and her special talent for producing meaningful work in the service of others and the greater good. They comment on her leadership style, always with a lack of ego and evoking awe at her graceful and empathetic engagement with groups, and her capacity to evoke trust, candor, and playfulness to guide groups into becoming a creative learning community." Another colleague across campus writes about his deep regard for Becky, not just as a competent, intelligent, and accomplished member of the faculty, but what she stands for as a person. He writes, "I love this lady because her compassion, deep like many of us, doesn't end with gushes of words, it ends with deeds. I would be thrilled if this example of authenticity in all its shapes and sizes, who sits here in our midst quietly making improvements in anything she touches, is the one we choose to honor. No one is more deserving." And finally, a staff member wrote, "She is the kind of person everyone would like to be, caring, kind, and considerate. She makes a difference to the world every day. We are all better people for having worked with her, learned from her, and been inspired by her." Enough about her. We are privileged to hear from her this afternoon. Becky.
This is like at the Oprah Winfrey Show, where she tells them to stop clapping. Thank you, Beth, for that wonderful introduction. It's very different from the introduction that you gave me the other night in my dream. In my dream, Beth was dressed in sweatpants and tennis shoes. And she came up to the podium and she said, and here's Becky Proehl. So Kathleen, my partner, was there with me, and I said, she didn't even really introduce me. But that was the least of my concern. I couldn't find my script. I had put it in something like this, and I had 3 or 4 of them, and I was going through them, and I was trying to find my script. I couldn't find it. I started sweating. I was like breaking out with, perspiration with nerves. But I thought, well, I've practiced this daggone thing so many times, I may as well just start talking. So I started talking, and there were about 4, 5, 6 people who were sitting around me, and a group of men in suits over at the other side. This was outside. They were over there, and they were talking. So somebody told them to be quiet, and they said, "We're here to socialize." So I thought, this isn't going particularly well. And it was outdoors, this event. And then it started to rain. So I looked for Beth to find out what we should do. She wasn't there. She had left. So Beth, I'm really happy to see you still sitting here. And I'm very happy to look out and see so many familiar, warm, smiling faces in contrast to my dream. So let me get started here. This afternoon, as you know, my topic, I want to share with you the journey that I've taken to the point that I'm speaking here about Lasallian pedagogy. Of course, the immediate stimulus was that night, was it like 15 years ago, when Beth announced that I was Professor of the Year. It was last May. If you were sitting near me, you heard me scream, because I had no idea that my colleague, Dean Elias, had conspired with staff and faculty and students to nominate me. So I was genuinely surprised and honored. The second thing you would have heard me say, again, if you were sitting near me, was, "Oh no, I got to give a speech." So for several months, I spent time trying to figure out what it was that I wanted to talk about. Then my colleague, Carol Swain, asked me if I would like to write an essay for the Educational Perspectives Journal, and I did. And it was in the middle of writing that essay that I decided that this is what I wanted to talk about. When I think about where to begin this story, I'm reminded of the time that I asked the prominent psychologist Nevitt Sanford, the founder of the Wright Institute, where I went to school, why he started the Wright Institute. And he said, well, to answer that question, I've got to go back to 1932. He was an elderly gentleman by now. He was Southern. He grew up 50 miles from my hometown in Virginia. He was literally in his crumpled linen suit, and he talked with many diversions, and 3 hours later, he came to the end of his story. So don't worry, I'm not going to talk for 3 hours, but in order to tell this story, we have to go back to 1965, when I was 17 years old. That's a picture of my hometown. It's Lynchburg, Virginia. Lynchburg is a very conservative town that's quite racially and socioeconomically segregated. For most of my life, I never went very far from Lynchburg. That's me when I was a little bitty baby. This is when I was getting a little bit older. The furthest I ever went to was Baltimore to visit my aunt when I was in the 4th grade. When I was 17, in between my junior and senior year in high school.
Oh, beautiful.
I applied to be a part of an intentional community, and I had no idea what an intentional community was. And it was in San Antonio, Texas. And I had no idea where San Antonio, Texas was. But to my surprise, I was one of 7 students who were accepted into this intentional community to live with a Methodist pastor and his family in the inner city of San Antonio. I later learned that intentional communities are where you sit on the floor a lot and you sing Kumbaya. When I arrived in San Antonio after many days of travel by train, it was like a foreign country to me. The language, the weather, the architecture, the people, and the terrain couldn't have been more different than my hometown in Central Virginia. Throughout the summer, I worked in the inner city with Mexican-American children and adolescents, and during that summer, I was introduced to such things as extreme poverty, crime, adolescent prostitution, alcohol, and drug abuse. I also learned to love the children with whom I worked, became skilled at communicating without words because my Spanish had a really strong Southern accent and they couldn't understand me. And I developed a strong affection for the Mexican people. I also had my first experience of worshiping with people from different national backgrounds and income levels. And I remember thinking that this is what Christianity should be. Oops, we don't want to go there. My mother kept all the letters that I wrote her that summer. I reread them recently. They were filled with descriptions of my experiences, and they gave me a clue as to who I was at 17 years old. For instance, after writing 6 pages about gangs, public housing, impoverished families, I wrote, "I have to go now. I have lots more to tell, but no time. I could write for hours. I can't wait to get home and talk to our church. I could really make them squirm." In another I wrote, remember, I grew up in Lynchburg, Virginia. "Mom, I wish you and Daddy would read Black Like Me. It is just the most wonderful book. I think it's worth the effort and the time. I won't tell you anything about it because it would be such a shock. The story is true." During that summer, I decided that I wanted to be a social worker. I did, in fact, work as a social worker in Richmond, Virginia with delinquent girls, obtained my master's degree in social work, and worked as a training specialist in the state of Virginia before moving to California. When I was in my doctoral program at the Wright Institute, I obtained an internship at Advanced Micro Devices to serve as facilitator for quality control circles. I was actually one of the few people who had a master's in group work in those days and was able to transfer those skills into the corporate setting. And I ended up working at AMD for 5 years. Hidden away in Silicon Valley, however, I was moving further and further away from the summer experience of my 17th year. I eventually left AMD and began working as an organizational consultant. This line of work ultimately led me to a job at John F. Kennedy University in the School of Management, directing an international executive MBA program. I became the associate dean and the dean of the School of Management at JFK. By the time I completed my tenure as dean, I'd worked in the corporate world or with the students who worked there for 12 years. Though I enjoyed my employment in the for-profit world, there was something missing in my work life. In fact, I never quite felt comfortable in that world. In 1992, my friend Tony Corso, some of you may remember him as a delightful faculty member in the School of Extended Ed, came into my office at JFK late one Friday afternoon when I was really tired of being a dean. I will spare you the details, but he encouraged me to apply for an opening at St. Mary's in the School of Extended Ed. I obviously did. I was hired, though now I teach in a doctorate in educational leadership program, where my students are sitting right back there. And I'm so happy to see them. When I first came to St. Mary's, I knew very little about De La Salle, and I'd never heard the term Lasallian educator. I was hired for my experience and competence in my area of expertise, rather than because I bonded with the Lasallian mission. I was 44 years old when I came to St. Mary's, with 20 years of experience in training and teaching adults, never having taught in a Catholic or liberal arts institution, and I had never been on the tenure ladder either. I arrived with a set of assumptions that I imagined would serve me quite well, as they had done in my previous teaching. These included viewing my adult students as self-directed learners who knew what they wanted to learn and how to do so. Seeing my role primarily as that of a subject matter expert, and believing in the value of content-based assignments that had direct relevance for my adult students' work lives. I'd established a rather tidy set of boundaries around how I interacted with my students and how I saw my role. I continued to teach the adults at St. Mary's as I had taught in other institutions, but I began to think differently about my role during the period when Brother Mel initiated the New Century Report and subsequent discussions. This was the first time that I really remember discussing the Catholic, Lasallian, and liberal arts traditions of the college. As I learned more about the Lasallian educator, my pedagogical approach gradually began to change. And in a liberating way, I felt freed from adhering to adult learner principles. For example, though I still respect the knowledge and skills my students bring to their studies, I no longer view them simply as self-directed learners who are capable of managing their educational experience. I now know that my doctoral students, just as our undergraduate students, can easily fall behind in their studies, become overwhelmed and discouraged, and lose sight of their goals. I also know that students who come from disadvantaged educational backgrounds and who speak English as a second language may be greatly challenged by graduate study, though they could well be outstanding practitioners. Keeping this in mind, I consistently reach out to my students to offer encouragement and support, a sympathetic ear, an extra tutorial session, or a session in the library. I know which of my students are in danger of falling through the cracks, and I do all I can to prevent that from happening. I certainly am not always successful, but it's not for the lack of trying. While my teaching practices were changing incrementally, there were two experiences that were transformative: participating in the Lasallian Social Justice Institute in El Paso and Juarez, and in the International Lasallian University Leadership Program in Rome. The LSJI is a one-week immersion program that provides a relational encounter with persons living in poverty. When I was in El Paso and Juarez with the LSJI, I was transported back approximately 40 years to my youthful experiences in San Antonio. The heat, the architecture, the language, the people, and the terrain were surprisingly familiar to me. During the experience, I was moved when hearing stories of the immigrants who risked so much to come to the United States, and when standing at the chain-link fence that separates the United States from Mexico, I felt both sadness and anger. One of my most memorable experiences was our visit to a small colonia called Anapur, where we met Christina Estrada, a local heroine who continues to work tirelessly to help keep children enrolled in school. While sitting in one of the schoolrooms at her house, I had a very powerful experience of being called to help Christina raise money for the children in this poor border town. And the zeal and the passion that I'd experienced in San Antonio returned, though by then I had a greater capacity to do something with that passion. Imagine my surprise when I recently read one of my San Antonio letters to my parents. Again, I was 17. Maybe after I get out of college, I could do this type of work. Maybe since I was able to participate in this program, this just may be my Christian calling to help the Mexicans. I'm not sure, but I know I want to help some people in the world. Many of you know that as a result of my experience, I started the Enough for Education Project, and we've raised $300,000 to pay for registration fees, uniforms, shoes, and books for the children there. This sum is in large part the gift of one generous friend and donor. But many of you in this room have given $20 to buy a children's dictionary or $60 a month to help keep a student in high school. The LSJI experience helped me recognize the power of offering experiences that educate the mind but also touch the heart. I've come to realize that graduate education in a Lasallian institution should encompass much more than cognitive skills. The Lasallian educator, as I understand it, is concerned with students' total development, including their emotional, spiritual, and physical development. In sharp contrast to my previous teaching experiences with adult professionals, I want my students to be touched by their educational journey, inspired to be advocates for social justice, and willing to be risk takers for innovation. As such, my teaching practices have changed dramatically. For example, I use videos and movies that touch the heart, involve students in community-based research projects, and have assignments where students examine educational innovations that address social injustice. It's because of my commitment to the Lasallian mission that I now want my doctoral students to take their skills, knowledge, and personal dedication to develop programs that extend the Lasallian mission into new venues. The second experience that deeply affected me was my participation in the Rome program. It is an intensive 2-week immersion program for faculty leaders from around the globe, concentrating on Lasallian history and Catholic spirituality. During my time there, I spent many hours reading about De La Salle, becoming fascinated with how the Lasallian mission has been embodied in schools throughout the world. I felt privileged to hear the participants from such places as Bethlehem, Philippines, and Colombia talk about their educational programs and the challenges they face in living the Lasallian mission in their countries. It was a wonderful experience to bond with educators throughout the world who have similar values and educational aspirations for their students as I. As a result of my experience, I now understand and have come to believe that I've been called to this vocation as educator. Sorry. I once had a massage therapist who was Danish, and she would say, breathe. So I need to breathe up here. Anyway, I agree that to teach in a Lasallian school should be viewed not just as a means of livelihood, a profession, but above all, a vocation. As such, Lasallian educators take their responsibilities for their students and their development quite seriously, always recognizing each student's individuality and intrinsic dignity. And the nature of the student-teacher relationship is different as well. I knew that the members of the order that De La Salle founded were called brothers, but I never gave much thought to that term. In Rome, I learned that he intentionally used the term brother rather than master, the term that was used for educators at that time. And he stressed that teachers must accompany their students on their educational journey. De La Salle chose this term to characterize the kind of educational relationship of student to teacher that he envisioned, that of firmness and gentleness of a big brother to a younger brother. I'm fond of the image of being like a big sister to my students. It requires a deeper relationship and a deeper commitment to them. Being like an older brother or sister is certainly more demanding than being a rather distant faculty member but the relationship is ever so much more gratifying. Interestingly, though I'm more connected to my students than I was in my previous teaching, I'm also a more rigorous instructor, challenging students to reach beyond what they believe they are capable. I'm inspired by the educational approach of many Lasallian schools, especially in developing countries, that only admit the neediest students while still maintaining high academic standards. This approach brings together quite nicely two distinct parts of me. The person who always feels drawn to the underdog, and the one who pushes their students just a bit harder than they want. For example, while the EDD program admits students who are strong academically, many still have doubts about their ability to successfully complete a doctoral program, especially the dissertation. Taking a lesson from the Lasallians, I do all I can to set a high bar and motivate my students to reach that bar. I often receive feedback from them stating they appreciated the high standards that I have, though they may not have enjoyed it at the time. Of course, this means that I must do my part to support the students to achieve their best work. My feedback and analysis of their work must be in depth and extensive, while still communicating that I believe they can accomplish the highest levels of educational quality. Additionally, I must interact with the students so they're not intimidated, but are energized to increase their level of commitment. I must admit, again, that I'm not always successful at this because I'm at times frustrated by what I perceive as a lack of effort. But there are enough success stories, like my student who did the yes at the soccer game, to motivate me to continue to challenge and support my students. In closing, I came to St. Mary's College because of the reputation for academic quality. I was afforded an opportunity to teach adult students. The campus itself was beautiful, the college was well established, and I desperately wanted to leave my other job. None of these reasons had anything to do with the Lasallian or Catholic nature of the college. Over time, I've long forgotten my other job. That is until I wrote this. The emphasis on academic quality has become second nature. And sometimes I'm not even aware of the beauty of our campus. What has emerged as the constant in my work at St. Mary's has been my evolution as a Lasallian educator. My journey has not been a linear one. There have been many ups and downs. I've experienced disappointments when I have not lived up to the personal standards that I hold, or when college decisions were made that did not seem aligned with espoused Lasallian values. I often become frustrated with my faculty colleagues, and they with me, discouraged by my students' performance, or stymied by bureaucratic constraints. But what does inspire and encourage me is my ongoing commitment to the Lasallian mission and my deep aspiration that my students will be transformed by their experience at St. Mary's. Much as I have been
Becky steps away, and before you continue to enjoy your company and the food, I have a special presentation, a gift that comes from about 3,000 miles away from your niece and family who could not be present. So, you are lucky. Thank you all.
I'll just look what it is. I doubt it's anything that's typical of Lynchburg. Oh, now this is interesting.
Oh, wow.
This is like something. She found you.
Yeah.
My niece found you.
She did.
She's very enterprising. And then there's something else in here. She texted me when I was at lunchtime. I don't know what it's going to be. It's pink. It's it would be really pretty with my outfit. Sorry, Kathleen, I'll take this one. Thank you all.